It was just an episode in a long political struggle between the Labour Party and the opposition to the Labour Party, which had continued throughout the life of Jabotinsky, whose pen name used to be Altalena. And so it was adopted by the underground Irgun to name the ship in which we wanted to bring arms to help fight the war here, because the war with the Arabs had started. Now, the Irgun was an independent organization, and in fact had already disbanded, except for its unit in Jerusalem, because the arms we had been able to get from the French government had not arrived on time as we had expected it. And by the time it arrived, the state had already been declared, and Ben Gurion, our chief opponent, was prime minister. And so, to bring in the arms of the Altalena, we had to have, or Begin decided that we must have Ben Gurion's consent as prime minister. But as we had got the arms, we wanted 20% for our people fighting in Jerusalem. Now, I must explain that in Jerusalem, there was still the Haganah and the Irgun and the Lehi had remained in existence because Jerusalem had been excluded from the Jewish state. The partition decision, the partition of Palestine, had made Jerusalem, or had seen Jerusalem as an independent area which was not given to us, so to speak. And that's why we had continued, all three organizations had continued to fight there. Now, our people, the Haganah, was short of arms, and so we said, we were bringing these arms, you can have 80% of the arms, and as a matter of fact, you can take over the ship. But we want 20% for us. So that in fact, from our point of view, the whole problem was just 20%. However, I know from my own experience that we had informed the government that we had a ship and that we were going to bring her with arms. I know because I was present at the meeting when we told the representatives that. I had been in Paris myself, and so I wasn't part of the negotiations. We had a kind of what we called an ambassador in France, Dr. Ariel. On the day after the state was declared, I arrived here from Paris to tell Begin that the arms were promised, but I didn't know when we would get them. We had thought we'd have them in May, but we weren't quite certain because the French bureaucracy was holding things up. Decisions were taken, but you had to wait until they actually delivered the arms. But I was able to tell Begin, when we met, Begin and Meridor and Landau and I from the Irgun, and Eshkol subsequently was Prime Minister, and the head of the Haganah, Galili, and another member of the Haganah named Cohen, I don't remember his first name. We told them that we had the ship, and we actually made an offer to them that we would let them have the ship, and they could use our ship. We were going to bring immigrants on the ship as well. We had 800 people waiting in France at Marseille. We said they could add to these 800 as many people as they liked, and they could buy. We would buy from them, or rather, they would give us sufficient money to buy $500,000 worth of arms for the unit in Jerusalem, and with that they could also have the whole ship. We would bring one load. We would bring one lot to Israel, and thereafter the ship would be transferred to the state of Israel. And after 2 days, 3 days, we saw them on the Saturday night at midnight. On the Monday, their answer was a refusal. They were not prepared to make a deal with us. Right. This was the 15th of May 1948. The arms finally were handed over to us in the middle of June, and I had gone back to Paris, and I was in charge of the Paris office of the Irgun throughout those weeks. I had gone back to Paris to oversee the preparations that were being made for the people who were being brought here. They were kept in a camp near Marseille. We had to feed them and look after them and so on. They were all waiting to get onto the ship. And finally, the arms arrived. Ariel was there. He had been negotiating for them, and they were. The arms were put onto the boat. Now, the boat was an American ship which had been in the war. It was what they call landing boat tanks. Well, such a landing boat comes right up to the shore, and the tanks are sort of rolled from the boat onto the ground, and other arms as well. And so we had, this was before the middle of June, we had asked, or rather we had been asked by the captain of the ship. The captain of the ship was again an American officer, a naval officer, and so he knew his way around. Monroe Fine was his name. His name is still around, I think. And he had asked us that we should find a landing spot which would suit this boat. And we actually sent a man to Tel Aviv, came back and reported that Tel Aviv was an excellent place for the ship. I had, as far as I could see, as far as I knew, I had, and I think the 2 or 3 other members of the Irgun leadership that happened to be in Paris at the time, had sufficient authority when the ship was ready to send her. The question arose, however, would it be wise to send her, because just then the United Nations declared a truce in the war. We discussed it at great length. Now, we were always short of arms, not only we, the Haganah was also short of arms, everybody was short of arms. And the question was, could we take the risk of sending the ship while there was a truce on, because then if we were attacked by, let us say, Egypt, which was the only possible attacker, or by some United Nations force, I don't think there was such a thing, but I didn't know then, we don't know now. Which risk was the greater? Fine, the captain, said he assured us that he could bring the ship safely to port. And so on the strength of that, I said, go ahead, and the people with me, we all agreed. There was nobody who disagreed with that. I mention this particularly because the ship's departure information of the ship's departure was published because before it left Port de Bouc, which is right near Marseille, there had been a strike of Arab workers at the port because they had somehow discovered that this was a boat to be engaged in the war, and they didn't like the idea. There had been a BBC report of the ships leaving. The result was, I don't know the details, I never knew the details, that Begin decided that we should stop the boat that already left by that time. We should stop the boat until contact could be made with the Jewish agency, the Zionist leaders, Ben-Gurion, that they should give their assent to this. I assumed that as far as the sending of the ship was concerned, nobody would object. Why should anybody object to our bringing more arms into the country, of which, in any case, most would go to the army? And so, I, still in Paris, received a message from Begin, a telegram. Oh, we had discovered that we had a radio which was supposed to keep us in touch with Tel Aviv. So the radio didn't work, it broke down. So they had to send a telegram. And Begin's telegram said, if the boat hasn't left, hold it. I couldn't get in touch with the boat because of the broken down radio, of course. So I cabled back that I can't get in touch with the boat, that he should try to get the boat from his end. And I couldn't tell what had been happening at the Tel Aviv end. Meantime, I had gone to the Yugoslav embassy. I think I mentioned it in my book, because there was a deputy foreign minister of Yugoslavia had been in Israel as a member of the international, or a deputy member of the international investigating committee called the UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, a year earlier. And I had met him privately, personally, and I had met him again in Paris subsequently, and I thought that if I could get hold of him, in case the boat was being held up seriously, he might be prepared to help us without telling anybody, of course, outside of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was supposed to be friendly to us, to get Yugoslavia to allow the boat, meantime, to sail into a Yugoslav port, so that there would be no problem of supplies and so on. But he wasn't in the embassy, and nobody promised me even to get in touch with him. I mean, nobody got in touch with him. Somebody promised they would try, but we didn't hear from them. But that's a side issue. Meantime, in Israel, Begin had met with Galili again to tell him, well, Galili by this time knew that the boat had left, because the whole world knew that the boat had left, but to give him an official chance of giving his agreement. There was some discussion there, of which no details have been published, but I don't think there have been, except for this detail, two details. One, that they would agree to 20% of the arms being handed to the Irgun, but they didn't want the boat to sail into Tel Aviv. They wanted it to sail to Kfar Vitkin, a village halfway to Haifa. Now, the truth is that the village named Kfar Vitkin was a center, very important politically, to the Labour Party. I mean, it was a Labour Party kibbutz, or a village. Nobody except Labour Party people lived there. But Begin had no suspicions. I don't think how he was so pleased that there was an arrangement that I don't think he thought twice about it, and he agreed. Why didn't they agree to have Tel Aviv? Because Tel Aviv was much more of a center for the Irgun, and maybe they were afraid that we were going to bring thousands of people to the Irgun and really take the ship and capture it and start a war here with 800 people, taken from the street, so to speak. I don't know what exactly the calculation was, but it was something like that, in my opinion. And so the boat finally arrived at Kvarvitkin. They had promised, or rather Begin had been promised, that they would also send people to help unload the arms. But at the last moment, they withdrew that promise. I never heard that any reason was given, and the result was that a number of people from the Irgun, I suppose 20 or 30 people from the Irgun, went up to Kfarvitkin to help in the unloading. When they had unloaded some of the arms, nobody has ever explained exactly how many arms. It wasn't a major part of the consignment. It was certainly a small part of the consignment. They were surrounded. The people there, the 24 people who were there, were surrounded by Haganah people, and were told to, in effect, to surrender, with the idea that the boat should be handed over to them without their carrying out their part of the agreement. Begin, who was there, was horrified, and he thought to himself this was an error on somebody's part, because they had agreed to this. And so he decided that he would get on the boat and take the boat down to Tel Aviv, where he could meet with people from the government. He would take the boat down to Tel Aviv, where he could meet people from the government and clear up the misunderstanding. So accompanied him on the boat. When the boat was leaving, a couple of Haganah boats got ahead of the boat, or to the left of the boat or whatever, and accompanied it to Tel Aviv. It hit the rocks at Tel Aviv as it happened. Didn't get to the shore itself. And when it got there, they started shooting at it. Well, that part of the story, before it got there were 2 books were written by members of the Infant Air Force. One of them was by a friend of mine named Celia. The other was by an American volunteer. Each of them, separately, at different times, wrote that while this book was at sea, they were asked to bomb her, which they both refused to do. Well, I don't know to what extent any commentary is needed here, but it's quite clear that the idea was, for some reason, to destroy the boat even before it got here. However, as no such attempt was made, the shooting started after it got to Tel Aviv. the captain, they started, they had a I don't know what you call it, a cannon, they started firing a shell at it. And the captain was afraid that this would hit the boat and set it alight, with all the arms there as well. And so he had a white flag raised, and they continued shooting. He sent a message to whomever he could see, or I don't know how he sent a message to the commander of the Haganah unit that was fighting there, and they promised that they would stop he told them to stop shooting, but they didn't, and that's how the Haganah was destroyed. A shell hit the boat, and it went up in flames. The people on the boat, I don't know the exact number, something like 15 people were killed. The others jumped into the sea. Some couldn't swim, they were helped. There was a certain amount of self-help there. And that is the end of the story, except that the version by the government was that here was an attempt at a revolt, at a rising. How such a rising could be accomplished, I don't understand, because of the 800 people on the boat who had arrived on the boat, they were taken off the boat at Kfar Vitkin and were sent off to Netanya and other places round about for them to get a night's rest. They hadn't had a good, very much rest on the boat. They left without any arms. They went without any arms, because the arms that we had brought were, except for a few arms apparently, were still in the grease in the boxes. So it seems to me that most of the arms were lost in the sea, but I don't know. Maybe the Haganah got hold of some of it. I don't know afterwards. I can't know that. Well, and then immediately started a propaganda campaign against us that we wanted to rebel against the new Israeli government, that we wanted to take over the power in the country with our 800 young men and women. Unfortunately for the story, I don't remember there being any children on the boat. And against the whatever force of the army was around that could be used on their side to stop this revolt. Well, there's never been. We subsequently, when after the Knesset was established, I know that I was very much in favor of our demanding a government inquiry into this. Begin also agreed, but for some reason, I think it was because he was told that the Knesset, which was in their hands, they had a majority. The Knesset wouldn't have a discussion about it at all, so that I can't remember, but it was obviously decided that there was nothing that we could do about it, and leave it to history to decide.